and go.
A pleasant day, everyone. In this video, I, Elvin Miranda, together with Miss Mariah Meriam Elauria and Miss Kelso Duero, will be presenting to you a short discussion of how structuralism, as a way of approaching texts and practices, discuss culture. So for our discussion to be on point, I would just like to clarify the flow of our presentation. So first, we will be defining structuralism in itself and as a way of approaching texts and practice that is derived from the theoretical work of the Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure, together with some principal exponents. Secondly, we will try to give or point out examples for our discussion to be precise, yet comprehensive and informative. And lastly, we will be giving a summary or a short conclusion as to how structuralism discuss culture from from then and up until today. So next slide, please. So what is structuralism? Structuralism is the name that is given to a wide range of discourses that study underlying structures of signification. Signification occurs wherever there is a meaningful event or in the practice of some meaningful action. Hence, the phrase signifying practices, a meaningful event might include any of the following. So first, we have writing or reading a text, getting married, having a discussion over a cup of coffee, and a bottle. Most, if not all, meaningful events involve either a document or an exchange that can be documented. This would be called a text. So text might include any of the following: a news broadcast, an advertisement, an edition of Shakespeare's King Lear or Harry Potter, an edition of the Harry Potter, the manual for my new washing machine, the wedding vows, and a feature film. So from the point of view of structuralism, all texts, all meaningful events, and all signifying practices can be analyzed from their underlying structures. Such an analysis would reveal the patterns that characterize the systems that make such texts and practices possible. We cannot see a structure or a system per se. In fact, it would be very awkward for us if we were aware that all times of the structure that make our signifying practices possible. Rather, they remain unconscious but necessary aspects of our whole way of being what we are. Structuralism, therefore, promises to offer insights into what makes us the way we are. So, Mr. Colson Duero, please go on with our discussion.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Miranda. Good day again, everyone. I am Kelso S, and my parts discuss to you about the origin of where does structuralism, right? Structuralism came from. So structuralism first comes prominence to as a specific discourse with the work of a Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure to develop a branch of linguistics called structural linguistics. Saussure died before he was able to publish his material, but wait, I can't see my screen. Okay. But we have the meticulously recorded notes of several of his students made during the second course of 1908 to 1909. There's nothing authoritative about Saussure's theory, and even now, it is open to debate and controversy. Yet, there has been an extraordinarily diverse and fecund range of work, including a number of schools of thought in Eastern Europe, the United States, and thriving today in Japan, based upon readings of his initial insights as documented by students. So the reconstruction of his lecture courses can be found in the course in general linguistics. So based on this passage, we know that structuralism has been founded by Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure. However, it happens that before he could publish his work, he died. So therefore, his students continue his legacy, in which we can see structuralism in the course known as the course in general linguistics. So Saussure divides language into two parts, which is the signifier and the signified. So source is a relational theory of language. Meaning is produced not through a one-to-one relation to things in the world, but by establishing difference. For example, traffic lights operate within a system of 4 signs: red, which means stop; green, which means go; amber, which prepare for red; and amber and red prepare for green. So the relationship between the signifier green and the signified go is arbitrary. There is nothing in the color green that naturally attaches it to the verb go. So traffic lights would work equally well if red signified go and green signified stop. So the system works not by expressing a natural meaning, but by marking a difference, a distinction within a system of difference and relationships. Okay, so source others example is the game of chess. So a knight, for example, could be represented in any way a designer thought desirable, provided that how it was represented mark it as different from the other chess pieces. Okay, so what Saussure is trying to explain here is that there is an arbitrary relationship that exists between the signifier and the signified. For instance, example, a knight. We know that a knight is like clad in a shining armor, right? And there's always a horse about that. However, in a chess piece, a knight is only drawn as a horse without even a picture of a person there. But rather, we know that as chess players, we know that it resembles the piece of what is known as the knight. The knight. Okay, next. Yeah. So according to Saussure, meaning is also made in a process of combination and selection, horizontally among the syntagmatic axis and vertically along the paradigmatic axis. And substituting certain parts of the sentence for new parts can also change its meaning. So for example, Meriam made chicken broth today is meaningful through the accumulation of its different parts. So its accumulation is composed of Meriam, which is the doer of the action; the made, which is the verb; the chicken broth, which is the topic; and the time of place of today is meaningful through the accumulation of its different parts. Its meaning is only complete once the final word is spoken or inscribed. So therefore, its meaning will never be complete if you speak it rather in a pause or you did not completely finish your sentence. For instance, you say, Meriam made chicken broth. So therefore, it is a complete sentence. There's a complete thought. However, there is no sign of place whether when did Meriam made the chicken broth, either a while ago, yesterday, or maybe tomorrow, and so on. So Saussure calls this process the syntagmatic axis of language. One can add other parts to extend its meaningfulness. So therefore, a sentence, the meaning of the sentence will depend or will change if something is added onto it, if another word is added onto it. For instance, Meriam made chicken broth today while dreaming about her lover. So meaning is thus accumulated along the syntagmatic axis of language. This is perfectly clear when a sentence is interrupted. For example, I was going to say that, then you was interrupted. It is clear to me that Louis you promised to tell me about in which substituting certain parts of the sentence for new parts can also change meaning. For example, I could write, Meriam made salad today while dreaming about her lover, or Meriam made chicken broth today while dreaming about her new car. Such substitutions are said to be operating along the paradigmatic axis of language. So Again, let us consider another more politically charged example. For instance, terrorists carried out an attack on an army base today. So substitutions from the paradigmatic axis could alter the meaning of the sentence. It could change its meaning. For instance, if we substitute freedom fighters or anti-imperialist volunteers for the word terrorist, so the meaning of the entire sentence would change. So this would be achieved without any reference to a corresponding reality outside of the sentence itself. The meaning of the sentence is produced through a process of selection and combination. This is because the relationship between sign and referent, where in our earlier example, real dogs in the real world is also arbitrary, it follows, therefore, that the language we speak does not simply reflect the material reality of the world. Rather, by providing us with a conceptual map with which to impose a certain order on what we see and experience, the language we speak plays a significant role in shaping what constitutes for us the reality of the material world. So what I was trying to say in summary is that a sentence will vary or will be dependent, its meaning will depend upon its sentence construction, which means that every sentence contains a thousand or maybe hundreds or maybe more than one meaning. That would be all for my report. And for the next part, Miss Mariah Elauria will be the one to discuss it.
Thank you, Mr. Duero. So, Saussure course had many different kinds of influence on humanitist scholarship in the 20th century. He seems to have touched on so many different concerns that his influence is indicative of a fairly general condition. Because his overt concern is language, there have been some mistaken assumptions made about what the implication of structural linguistics are. Okay, let's continue. People have attempted to find a correlation between linguistic structures and cultural structures as if language itself determined cultural and even social experience. This attitude can be called linguisticism, the attempt to explain everything according to an understanding of language and its structures. Next. Many trains after Saussure can be seen to be working on the assumption that there is no social or cultural experience outside the structures that language makes possible. In fact, as developments in linguistics show, the category language cannot contain the what Saussure was interested in, despite his own assertions making his linguistics a general one. Instead of an empirical one, he had to find his explanatory terms in a phenomena. I'm sorry for the interruption. If they apply to language, then they just makes language one phenomenon among others that can be understood through structuralism. So in conclusion, structuralism, based primarily on the linguistic theories of Ferdinand Saussure, considered a language as a system of signs and signification, the elements of which are understandable only in relation to each other and to the system. In literary theory, structuralism challenged the belief that a work of literature reflected a given reality. Instead, It was constituted of linguistic conventions and situated among other texts. Structuralist critics analyzed material by examining underlying structures, such as cate- characterization or plot, and attempted to show how these patterns were universal and could thus be used to develop general conclusions about both individual works and the systems from which they emerged. The anthropologist Claude Levi-Strauss was an important champion of structuralism, as was Roman Jacobsen. Northrop Frye's attempts to categorize Western literature by archetype has had basis in structuralist thought. Structuralism regarded language as a closed, stable system, and by the late 1960s, it had given way to post-structuralism. Next. And that is all. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.